Welcome to my garden. Today we're going to be doing a winter garden tour where I'm going to walk you through, but not just any tour. It's going to be an unconventional tour where I'm going to show you how I break all the rules and whether those rules are really meant to be broken or not. When I was a beginner gardener, it quickly became apparent to me that there are rules in the gardening world that have to be followed in order for you to get a harvest. But as I've grown in my journey, I've started to wonder, like, which one of these rules are hard and fast and which one of these rules are not? Like, which ones can I skip? And so I spent this season breaking a lot of rules. So I wanted to show you around the garden, and as we walk around, I'm going to point out the things that I did that are completely against the rules or just mildly against the rules, and whether or not they worked. And I will say that there's a lot that didn't. So we're going to learn which rules are hard and fast and which ones are flexible. The first rule that I think really needs to be broken is don't give up on your plants too quickly. Back in August, I planted these guys in these pots, and I made a lot of mistakes here. But one of the biggest mistakes I made was I didn't water them because I was going away on a 2-month-long trip. I was testing out a new watering system called a Blvd while I was gone, hoping it would keep these guys alive, and it just barely kept them alive. I mean, these two especially looked like they were definitely on death's door. But I didn't give up on them, and when I got back, I changed it to where I was watering them and fertilizing them, and look how much they have come back. They are bushy and they were full of tomatoes. On top of the fact that they were not well watered, this guy is definitely in a pot too small. Way too small. But he's still really productive, so I'm pretty shocked. The biggest downside I learned from putting it in a pot too small is I have to water and fertilize this thing way more than I have to water and fertilize the other two. So don't give up on your plants too soon. They could bounce back. Unless you have a desperate need for that space, let them go. See what happens. These two beds right here, I have all my root vegetables, basically. I have carrots, I have garlic, I have potatoes, I have way down there onions. This is the guy right here that we're going to talk about on whether or not you can break the rules when it comes to timing. So carrots, I planted these in August. August here in Florida, ridiculous. But I planted them in August because I was leaving, and so I thought, let's see if they'll work. They did not. That is a rule that is meant not to be broken. These are not the same carrots. When I got back from my trip in October, I had to reseed this because not even one carrot plant, not one of the thousands of seeds I put down, germinated. So timing is kind of a hard and fast rule. Down here, I have my onion plants, and we put these in together. And there were some challenges with these onion plants. When I got them, some of them were good size, like these guys right here. But the ones right over here were the really super tiny ones that they came with, and I really thought, I don't think that those are gonna live. I'm pretty sure that they're gonna die. And as you can see, they are definitely a lot smaller and a lot wimpier than the larger ones that came. But they are still growing. The jury's still out on whether these guys are actually gonna get big enough to bulb, but it's definitely worth a shot. Now let's talk about the two rules I broke here. And these are not hard and fast rules in the gardening world, but I've seen a lot of people kind of take on this mentality with this one, which is I'm planting out my next season before my current season is over. So I have Brussels sprouts, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, all in this bed right here. But then I planted along with it a bunch of these peas. Technically, peas are still in the same season as these particular vegetables, but I didn't get them in fast enough. I didn't have room, and I needed this trellis that I was waiting on. So they got planted once the cauliflower and cabbage that was in this side of the bed got harvested. I immediately put down a layer of compost, stuck those guys in, and thankfully, they're going great. Now, if it had been the other side of the bed, where the sun is not shining on it like that, and that these plants, these bigger plants, would get in their way, I couldn't really do that. But because it was this side of the bed that gets that sun and not shadowed out by the plants, they're going great. Now on this side, oh, this side, these were all the plants that when I went on my trip did not make it. So I had some kale, I have some Brussels sprouts, some celery, some cabbage, and some cauliflower, all in this bed right here. And none of the celery actually made it. So what I did was when I got back, I headed over to my big box store and I purchased some transplants. And look how big these stalks are. This is going to be the biggest celery I have ever grown. Now, I'm not typically like a huge transplant person or start person, but celery is a long season crop, very much like Brussels sprouts. And if you don't get them started, and we already learned that timing is important, if you do not get them started in the time period that they like, they are not going to grow to completion. So I knew that if I were to start those from seed again, they would not grow. And so I took a chance and I did some transplants. I didn't know the variety. I didn't know anything about them except for the fact that they were in a 6-pod for $6. And I'm like, okay, we're going to give it a shot. And I put them in and they have done spectacular. So much so that I'm debating whether I really want to challenge myself in the future with celery from seed, because it is kind of a diva in the garden. So don't be afraid of transplants. If you are a primary grow from seed type person, take some of the stress off yourself. Get a couple transplants on those really hard to grow seedlings. The next rule I broke is spacing. And I am not alone in this. I know I'm not alone in this. I've seen some gardens on social media and they struggle with the same problem I do, which is how much space do you give these plants? Now I could be good and I could take out a tape measure and I could measure 12 to 24 inches. But for me, I am always trying to pack in as much as possible to get the best productivity. Now, if you do that too much, you are going to end up with smaller yields. Smaller cabbages, stunted growth, takes longer to grow. So you want to be careful about how tight you get your plants. This is about as tight as I could ever get cabbage. I am right on the border. And I can tell I'm right on the border because these guys right here are doing pretty good. They are spaced at about 12 inches apart. But those guys down there are probably more about 8 inches apart, and they are taking the longest time. So there is a balance when it comes to spacing. You don't want to be too close, but if you're too far apart, it's wasted space, guys, wasted space. Don't these cabbages look beautiful? This next rule is all around whether you should grow hybrids or not. So heirlooms are a type of seed that's kind of been around for like a significant amount of time. And when you save the seed from an heirloom, it is going to be true. It's going to create a clone of itself. Hybrids are a little bit different. Hybrids are where two plants are pollinated together and they reproduce them and they create an offspring, and that offspring has special characteristics that are unique to that one plant. So for this lettuce, this is a Salanova from Johnny Seed. There are two types. It is super heat tolerant. Super heat tolerant. It is crunchy. It is sweet. There's so much wonderfulness about it. And as opposed to some of my heirloom lettuce over here, it is bolting like crazy. It is finicky. Sometimes it's a little bitter. This stuff right here never is. But let's talk about what is the difference between heirloom and hybrid, because I think that's an important distinction. Other than the fact that heirlooms are true to seed and hybrids are not, which means when you save the seed from a hybrid, you are not going to get the same plant. That's probably the biggest difference. Some people think that hybrids are the same as GMO, and that is not the case. GMO is genetically modified in a lab. Hybrids, they're using the approach that we would use in dog reproduction, right? So you've seen my baby Bella. She is a Chorkie, so a Chihuahua and a Yorkie. Her parent, one of them was a Yorkie, the other one was a Chihuahua, and when they bred together, they created this little monster right here. And if Bella were to reproduce, she would produce something completely different. Maybe it would look more Yorkie, maybe it would look more Chihuahua, maybe it would be completely different, but it would not be the same as Bella. That's kind of how this system works. The hybrids have to have their parent plants, the same exact plants, reproducing in order to produce these offspring. to get another Bella. They aren't done genetically. This is sometimes done in a lab, but it's just forced pollination, similar to how we hand pollinate with cucumbers or melons or something. We hand pollinate with a Q-tip or with a paintbrush. It's very similar because it's a forced pollination versus a natural pollination. And once again, they're not true to seed, but there's a lot of benefits to hybrids. Hybrids give you all of the best qualities that you're looking for in a plant. Like when it comes to lettuce, I'm looking for something that can hold up to the heat, that is sweet and crisp and crunchy, but can grow outside. And these Salanovas really fit the bill. So I know that there's some people out there that are really into heirlooms, and I am too. But if you're struggling with a plant, maybe go try and give a hybrid a chance, because they are extremely beneficial in the garden. The next rule that I broke, more out of curiosity than anything else, was following the right nutritional information. So these guys right here are all beets. And I have had this problem for 2 years where my beets get like this big and then they do no more. They do nothing. They don't grow at all. And so, my very first year gardening, I had like luck, apparently. It was like beginner's luck. And I grew beets. And they were great. And I was like, oh, okay, these are the easiest things to grow during the winter. No, that is not true. It's been this might be the third year that I still have not gotten beets. But these guys are starting to look like they're going to do something for me. For the first time in 3 years, I have my first roots forming. And they're still pretty small, but they're there. And guys, every single one of them, from the red ones to the white ones to the yellow ones, I have beets in every color that are starting to grow. And the thing I did differently was I stopped following what people said about growing beets. They say that beets should not have virtually any nitrogen. Like, you don't give them nitrogen enriched fertilizer. So for the last 2 years, I've been giving significant amounts of like bone meal and kelp meal and using very minimal amounts of nitrogen. And they've done virtually nothing. They've almost never bulbed up. They hardly got bigger than this big. And now these guys, they've gotten huge. They look amazing and they're forming roots. So what I do differently? I decided to go with heavy nitrogen. The way I was doing it was not working. Everything online said to do it that way. It just wasn't working for me. So I decided to throw everything that I learned out the window and just go based on my gut. And my gut was telling me that if they're stunted and they're small, the first thing I needed to focus on was at least getting the plants to get larger. So, how to get a plant to get larger? Give it some nitrogen. But my biggest concern was, by giving them all this nitrogen, would they not form roots? Because that's typically what happens. And so far, that does not seem to be the case. So, this was a rule I am so stoked that I broke, and also equally as surprised that it's even working. We're over here in my next bed where it's kind of a combination of potatoes and lettuce. I'm letting the lettuce grow up in between the potatoes. The lettuce will get harvested, the roots will stay in there, and the potatoes will stay in there, and it'll be a 2-in-1 bed, a great use of space. But my biggest little learning lesson with this bed was about varieties. Everywhere I read said that Yukon Gold is a great potato to grow in Florida. But for the last 2.5 years, I've had just like mediocre success. I've been able to grow them up into a plant. I've been able to get roots, but I mean minuscule amounts. But everyone says Yukon Gold, Yukon Gold, Yukon Gold. So I'm challenging that, and I'm trying a couple different ones. Now, I do still have some Yukon Gold, because maybe it was just me, maybe it was the season. But I also have right here Golden Nugget, and right here I have a Cal White, or California White. So I can already tell that the California White has come up better, and I have been able to tell that the little Golden Nugget is coming up better as well. And my Yukon Golds are lagging behind like they always do. So the lesson learned here is that even if they're telling you that a specific variety online is the one to grow in Florida, it may be, but it may not be the one to grow in your Florida garden. If you're having fun hanging out with me today, make sure that you subscribe. And if you are subscribed, make sure you head down into the comments and let me know. I'm going to be doing an upcoming Ask Me Anything type series. So if you've had a question about a plant or a vegetable or a fruit tree or soil or personal about me and you know, maybe how I got into gardening and things like that, head down into the comments and leave your question, and I promise I'm going to answer as many questions as possible in my Ask Me Anything series. This year has been a big learning year for me when it comes to green stalks and whether or not to break the rules with green stalks. And in a lot of instances, I have learned that it is actually a good idea to break the rules. But in other instances, I have learned that it's not. So let's talk about those. First and foremost, I recently did a video where I tested the soil. Their recommendation at Greenstock was Fox Farm. And unfortunately, Fox Farm did not do as well as some of the other ones. ProMix, to be exact. ProMix did amazing. Even Miracle-Gro did really well. So not following their soil recommendations is probably a good idea. It will not only give you really big and healthy plants, but it'll also save you a little bit of money because that Fox Farm stuff is really expensive. Another thing that I learned was there are some plants that really you cannot push the zone, and there are some plants that you can push the zones. So I am growing tomatoes, cucumbers, and peppers, along with some potatoes, but this is not pushing the zone. But these guys down here are all pushing the zone because we are in winter, and I started these, I believe in, yes, November I started these. And everyone here in Florida knows, unless you're in South Florida, you are not starting tomatoes in November. Crazy person. I did learn that tomatoes don't seem to mind as long as they're given protection. So this slides into this shed whenever it gets a little bit too cold. Cucumbers, on the other hand, that's a hard and fast rule. My cucumbers, not one single one of them lived. They have all died, and they have not received temperatures that were super cold. In fact, I think it is the cold, wet winter that we've had that took these guys out. Cucumbers are already known as being a plant that is really kind of finicky when it comes to fungal issues. So during the spring and fall, they really grow well, but here in winter or in summer, they are not going to do well. It's either too hot or too cold in the middle of a fungal issue. So yeah, cucumbers are no. Peppers, I'm going to put this on the mediocre scale. If you are just wanting to grow your peppers up quickly over the winter, you know, I can understand maybe planting them, but I mean, they've stayed pretty small. They've never flowered. They've grown just so slowly. So I've learned that if you're just trying to start them to get yourself a head start, that could be a good way to get yourself a head start. But yeah, not to actually get production. Not like with the tomatoes. Now let's talk about the instance where it's important not to break the rules with a green stalk, and that is strawberries. I have learned my lesson. I did this one perfectly according to the recommendations of green stalk, and it worked, finally. In the past, I maybe haven't grown it in the right soil, or maybe I haven't put it in the right spot, or maybe I didn't turn it or water it the same way. But I treated these strawberries exactly like green stalk suggested, and they worked. So sometimes it's important to follow the rules. Sometimes it's okay to bounce them. But I have learned with strawberries, I really need to follow the rules here. They need light, fluffy soil mixed with perlite, mixed with berry tone, ProMix specifically, compost mixed in, watered only from the top, otherwise they're going to get a bunch of fungal issues. You know, placed in an area where I'm rotating this, and I am rotating it. I know it's shocking. I'm following all the rules. The rule breaker is not rule breaking, but I am getting a lovely, beautiful amount of strawberries. So I am completely okay with following the rules here. Now I'd love to go ahead and show you my little orchard, my little mini orchard, but all of my trees are pretty much dormant and they kind of look like crap. Here it is, the loquat. That one hasn't lost its leaves. The lychee hasn't lost its leaves, but pretty much everything else is in dormancy, so it's really not that cool to take a look at. There is a lesson that I learned that I wanted to share with you, but it's over here in the pool deck. Out here on the pool deck, I am growing some tropical things like this jabuticaba. I'm sure I'm pronouncing it wrong. Behind me, I have the banana that's looking a little rough from the cold weather. It's a little bit of a diva, if I'm just being honest. But the ones that are really shocking me right now is these little guys right here. I have been growing these trees. This is a sweet almond, a mulberry, and this one is a vitex. And I thought for the longest time that they were dead. They don't look so dead now, right? This one still does. This one looks really dead. And I left them out here on my patio because I was just like, you know, let's just see if they bounce back. Sometimes plants bounce back in spring. What I think I wasn't paying attention to was that they were entering some form of dormancy for the winter. The mulberry lost all of its leaves. The sweet almond didn't lose all of its leaves, but it definitely was struggling. It was not happy. And then the vitex lost all of its leaves, but I can see up here at the very tippy top, there is buds forming. This plant, although it looks rough, is still alive. In fact, now that I'm standing here, I just noticed that this little mulberry has mulberries. I didn't even notice that. I've been ignoring them for so long because I thought that they were dead. I would water them maybe every 2 weeks. Look at that. There's like little baby mulberries. I gotta show you guys this. I seriously was not even paying attention. I didn't even notice that they had like flowers. But these little white, fuzzy, weird looking things right there, those are the start of mulberries. And we can't talk about breaking the rules without talking about planting seeds we should not be planting. But before we jump into that, check out these seed cell trays, man. These are some seriously sturdy seed starting trays. I got these from Epic Gardener. They sent me some to try out, and I am so incredibly impressed. These guys are, I mean, strong. They don't bend at all. They have these cute little holes in the bottom so that you can pop your plants out. I already started a bunch of plants in them, but I'm also starting Seminole pumpkins and Burgrass buttercup squash. And I know you're not supposed to start plants like squash or watermelon or cucumber in seed cell trays because they don't transplant well. But I'm suspecting that the size of these trays, the breathability for the roots, the easy way to get them out instead of using my lucky garden spoon, I'm suspecting that that is going to make a world of difference when it comes to getting these transplanted. And I can get them started now instead of having to wait and possibly get a frost late or run into summer too quickly, which I'm very, very concerned about, that this year's summer is going to be starting very early. So I'm super excited about these trays. If you want to give them a shot, I'm going to put them down in the description. I think they're probably about the best quality tray I've ever seen. And I'm so excited that they wanted to work with me and they sent them to me because I am stoked. I actually threw out all of my old trays. The minute I put these in and started using them, I threw away all my trays. It's pretty crazy. I think they're really well priced, you know, for the quality that you're getting. They're not super expensive. But for today, what we're gonna do is we are gonna get some trays started for some watermelons. And I know you're not supposed to start watermelons in trays, but I don't care. Because if I don't get these watermelons started now, they have such a long growing season here that I feel like they're just going to be filled with disease if I don't get them started sooner than later. By summer, you know, they will grow into the summer. They do okay into the summer, but you really have to pay attention to disease, and they have a challenge. So anything that I can do to help start them earlier, the better. And one of the things that I'm doing is I'm picking my favorite variety, which is the Moon and Stars. I did a challenge last year where I grew, I think it was like 7 to 9 different varieties. And the Moon and Stars came out by far the best plant for watermelons here in Florida. So I'm only growing those this year. They are an heirloom variety. They're very pretty. very sweet, and they seem pretty good resistance-wise to disease. So I filled my tray with some moist soil. I stuck my seeds down in there. You can see just the tips of them. I'm going an inch down. I'm just going to pinch that dirt over the top of them. And I started out with moist seed starting mix, but I am going to add just a tiny bit of water. And I'm going to set them over here to germinate with my other seed starting tray. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today and doing maybe a little bit of an unconventional garden tour. I thought it was a lot of fun to talk about all the rules that you break and which ones work and which ones don't. Some of them were surprises, like the beets. That one really surprises me. And then strawberries, you know, it's definitely one you got to stick to the rules with. But I hope you had fun. And if you did, make sure to give me a big thumbs up. Happy gardening, guys.